I've heard that it works better with the lens cap off.
Yeah.
Let's see, for some reason, I may have you sit over here
Sure.
because the
Sure.
light, your face is in the shadow.
Yeah, okay.
So, let me move things a little bit. Well, that's still in the shade.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Well,
This is a short interview with Dr. George Bleasby, who served the Westminster College from 1946 to 1975 as professor of English and chair of the department for most of those years. Dr. Bleasby has degrees from University of Michigan and University of Pittsburgh. As a mark of the esteem which he has held at the college, he was given an honorary degree in 1989 of Doctor of Literature. The department has also established a colloquium in his name, which is at which papers are presented and discussion follows. Dr. Bleasby is one of the leaders in founding the Friends of the Library, and as curator of rare books has continued to serve the college in a number of ways. He's also a member of the Committee on Cultural Artifacts. Dr. Bleasby, would you give us a short description of the background of your first education and so forth, that sort of thing?
I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan, BA 43, and an MA degree in 46. Now, is that what you're thinking of? Was that the kind of information you're looking for?
Well, public school earlier, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Queen Victoria Public School in Toronto, Ontario, and the Parkdale Collegiate Institute in Toronto, Ontario. Those are my public school backgrounds. And I completed my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh in '52. And my dissertation there was a study of James Fenimore Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales. And he's been one of my leading interests. Even now, I'm still interested in early editions of James Fenimore Cooper.
And you came to Westminster in 1946.
1946 as assistant professor, and I say this with a kind of humor. I was hired at $2,900 a year. And Jean and I rented an apartment in New Wilmington for $25 a month with the understanding that I would take care of the furnace in the wintertime. So we had a rather interesting beginning here, and I've enjoyed all my stay here. I'm actually approaching my 50th year as associated with Westminster College. In '96 I will have served the college in various ways for 50 years, and I've been very happy. I've had my ups and downs, I might add, but I've enjoyed my stay at Westminster. It's been a good school for me, and I think it's an excellent school for youngsters as well.
Now you came in 1946.
Right.
Dr. Mary Purdy was chair of the department at that time.
That's right.
And I believe she was alumnus of the same school as you were.
Yes, I think she had a PhD at the University of Michigan, and she was Phi Delta Kappa, of course, at Michigan. Yes, I think she recommended my appointment partly because I was a graduate of Michigan, and she had served out a degree or two there. Very interesting lady.
And one of your closest friends was John Forey, who came at the same time you did.
That is right. Dr. Forey was a very fine friend, a wonderful colleague. He came in 1946 with me. John had a very fine background. He had completed an MA at the University of Pennsylvania. For some mysterious reason, he was given an appointment as an instructor. Although his background was far superior to mine, for some reason or other, he was appointed as an instructor. John served as dean for 8 years, 8 of his years here, and I must say that I consider John Forey to be one of the finest administrators I've ever worked under. He had a remarkable capacity for sympathizing with you, but rendering fair and sound judgment along with the sympathy. He died in 1965 of a heart attack, and I have no hesitation in saying that college was never quite the same for me as it was when John was with me. Remarkable man, wonderful teacher. He knew Shakespeare forwards and backwards. He was a splendid reader in his own right, and he made Shakespeare one of our most popular subjects during his stay here. We used to fill out 2 large sections in Shakespeare for John. He was a superior man in many ways. It's hard for me to realize that he's been gone for 30 years at least. It's really difficult. But he was a memorable character. Like many other men and women at Westminster, I remember him dearly and with affection and a great deal of respect.
Did he take it easy on you in playing tennis?
John never eased up on the tennis court. And I have never been a really good tennis player, but we had some slam-bang matches down on the old courts. I have played a slam-bang kind of tennis, quite erratic, but sometimes exciting. John was a methodical, careful tennis player, always putting the ball where he wanted it to go. He had a good serve, and he was sharp in anticipating the play of the game. Yeah, I must say, I never defeated John on the tennis court. But he was a wonderful man out there too. I was often a partner of his in the county championships, and sometimes we made the 2nd or 3rd round. But John was a model tennis player and a model scholar. Yeah.
Now, when you came, what courses did you teach initially?
When I came, first in those days we all taught 15 hours. We taught 5 courses, and I taught 2 courses of freshman composition, 30 students in each, an impossible load. And then I taught 3 sections of what we called humanities. The humanities course was really a great books course. I enjoyed it a great deal. We read the masterpieces of classical fiction, modern fiction, Russian fiction, Greek fiction. It was just a wonderful outing. But I was rather astonished when I met Dr. Purdy in the office for the first time. I asked her for my schedule, and she was ready with it, and it indicated I would teach 3 courses of composition, 2 courses of composition and 3 of great books. I had to begin all of these courses. They were all new to me. I had no background in the academic school at all. I had to master the whole business. But Dr. Purdy was very firm. She gave me outlines on much of the material, and away we went. And those early days were exciting too, because in 1946 we registered a great many men and women who had been recently released from the Army. So they marched into our classroom with this vast military experience. I was sometimes amused to realize that I was teaching a class that contained 3 or 4 ex-colonels in the Air Force, fighter pilots, bomber pilots, and they had wonderful stories to tell. It was 1946 was, I would say, one of the highlights of my stay at Westminster. It was exciting, and these interesting young men and women who had been through the Holocaust of the war and who were ready to tell you about it. Not only that, they were intensely curious. They were going to get their money's worth. And you knew when you entered that classroom, you'd better know something or you'd be in trouble. So the first years were very good, very enjoyable indeed.
There was a good bit of unsettledness or excitement in other ways at that time, I believe.
Yeah. Westminster's always had the capacity for providing exciting moments. And I may as well explore one now because I can now look upon it with a good sense of humor. At the time I was upset and disturbed by it. In the fall of 1954, we had a flourishing weekly newspaper called the Hallcat, and the editor, for some reason or other, resented the supervision of an advisor. So she became hostile, rude, insolent, even boorish in her approach to the faculty advisor. And the faculty advisor told me about this. I was chairman of the department at that time, so I scribbled a note to the young lady who was annoying me, and I said, henceforth you are no longer associated with the Hallcat Weekly newspaper. I'm reorganizing the staff. Your services will not be needed. I did not realize that this would provoke a storm. I mean a storm of resentment, indignation that stretched through the student body, through the faculty. And committees were organized. I was condemned as one of the monsters of modern education. It was really a furious affair. Well, we had it back and forth for several weeks, and finally we did straighten things out, and the young lady apologized for her errors, and the advisor was returned to his duties. Some very good things came out of that. I remember Dr. Orr called me into his office and said, George, I don't mind the excitement you caused by discharging this editor. But he said, I wish you'd give me a little notice before you ring the bell. I said, Doctor, I'm very sorry about the whole thing. Most regrettable. I apologize, the whole business. But out of that row came a very nice thing. We formed our first committee on publications, and I was responsible for it. I visited a number of universities and colleges to get ideas on the supervision of college newspapers. So when I returned, I put the proposal for organizing a publications committee made up of student advisors, faculty advisors, members of the administration. It was a sensible thing to do, and it pulled our whole background in journalism out of the chaos and the ignorance and darkness of old times. And it gave us a practical approach to problems in the freedom of speech, ethics, scholarships, journalism. It was a very, very fine design. So out of the disaster that I prompted and started, out of the disaster came a very satisfactory resolution in terms of the Publications Committee. The row of 1954 was one of the highlights of my stay.
Was that about the end of the program in journalism that was offered at one time?
That is right. We had a very fine program in journalism here, The young lady whose insulting behavior upset me was a prominent graduate of the journalism. What killed journalism at Westminster finally was something that very few people know about. The Department of Education in those days offered certificates to young men and women who wanted to teach journalism. So we had a reason for being. Our department was teaching people how to be journalists and how to teach journalism. Then suddenly, without warning, the State Department of Education abandoned the whole idea of certifying teachers of journalism. And when they did that, of course, they simply pulled the rug from under our journalism program. And we lost a great deal of appeal. And from that time on, it became more and more difficult. We also were having considerable trouble staffing the journalism arrangement or program, for the very simple reason that most good journalists are in journalism, not teaching it. They're out there doing the work. They're reporting, they're writing, they're reading. So they are not interested specifically in teaching the thing. But I did regret the passing of journalism. We had some very fine instructors in it, and it was a worthwhile program. But it perished like many good things. It passed away. I trust it rests in peace nowadays.
There are some other changes that have happened over the years that you were in the English department. Would you comment on some of those?
Well, that's a little bit difficult. Now, we're looking for a change. I think one change that has given me grounds for serious thought is the turning away from what I think we had in general education. When I came to Westminster, the first 2 years were required subjects. The courses were outlined carefully. There was no deviation, no choice. You took those courses for the first 2 years, freshman, sophomore. It was a very good idea because it meant that all the students had a shared educational experience that was rather wonderful. For instance, everybody was required to take the Great Books course. Now, many students growled and snarled about this requirement, but before the course was over, most of them were in the camp of the teachers who were teaching these courses. For instance, everybody read the Odyssey. Everybody read 5 Greek plays. Everybody read 5 Russian plays. And then, above all, every student took 1 semester in New Testament and a semester in the Old Testament. That meant that every student in the college, high or low degree or whatever it was, every student in the college knew something about the greatest book of all, the Old and the New Testament. As the years wore on, there were more and more infringements on this required program. We began to push into it electives. The Department of Religion turned away from religion to modern philosophy, to modern ethics. There was a loosening up of the whole thing. And that's been going on throughout the years. And I find it a little bit disturbing. For instance, now in the English department, you register not by courses in their names, you register in courses that are numbered. In other words, you elect a number. You no longer elect a course in Cooper or Mark Twain or Dickens. You elect a number and you trust and hope that the instructor will have an interesting, vital, and useful course for you. And it usually does. But strange things can happen. Can you imagine a small liberal arts college that will graduate students who've never read a play by Shakespeare? Of course not. It's ridiculous. And that's what happens now. We have, for instance, we have several people trained in special fields. They're no longer teaching those fields. They're teaching perhaps the Chinese novel, the Japanese novel. The idea is multicultural, that's fine. Let us see all these other literatures. But there, in my estimation, my feeling, there is a basic program in undergraduate education, and you must take it. If you don't take it, you will learn a great deal about not much of anything. And I prefer depth, solid depth. I prefer the seminar on Dickens, for instance, to a rambling course that takes in 8 or 10 modern novels. I'm sorry, I'm old-fashioned. I'm just old-fashioned about these things. I have definite convictions about education. It's got to be basic, it's got to be solidly, corely established by tradition, by time, by scholars, so we all know what we're taking, we all know what we're reading, and we're loving it and enjoying every day of it. You can't discard the Odyssey of Homer without paying a price. You're going to pay the price. And you can't discard a course in the tragedies of Shakespeare without paying a price. And the price is heavy. And you'll discover this when you move off the campus and enter the real world outside.
You mentioned Dickens. I happen to know that he's one of your favorites. And
yes, he is.
What are some of the authors that you have enjoyed, perhaps in teaching, but perhaps just in reading?
Well, two of my outside, what I would call my outside enjoyments have been spent with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. I've read all of Dostoevsky's major works with some care, and I've read the major works of Tolstoy with some care too. So those are two important figures that are outside of my regular background studies. I've liked Dostoevsky from the very, very beginning. He was a man who had a wonderful sense of evil, good and evil. He had worked very extensively with the psychology of character. He liked to place characters in tragic and dark and dangerous situations, and then would see what could be salvaged in that situation. He was a master of psychological evil and always working on Christian faith in the background. He had spent 4 terrible years in a labor camp for some of his opinions, and he carried these feelings and these experiences into his fiction. He had the feeling that there is, even in the worst human beings, some reclaimable characteristic or some reclaimable personality, determinedly orthodox in his belief. He believed firmly in the Russian Orthodox religion, but he had immense. I can't leave Dostoevsky without saying something about his last work, which was the famous Brothers Karamazov. It's a huge book. It runs around 800 pages in small print, but it's a study of 4 brothers who were involved in various capacities of troubled faith and despair and so forth. But it is simply a marvelous story. If you follow the 4 brothers through the 800 or 900 pages, you will discover almost every possibility for evil action and for noble and dignified and heroic action at the same time. So, the Brothers Karamazov is one of the master works. I would like to read it again, but I will not have the opportunities. Now, Tolstoy, I like because Tolstoy had the tremendous feeling that there was something basically wrong with civilization, with culture, with religion. He was upset and bothered by the many dreadful things that happen in modern life, warfare, evils and institutions, background. And he brought this all together, his feelings about life, in a wonderful book called Resurrection. It was written around 1899. Tolstoy pulled himself together to write one last big novel that would express his way of life. This is a marvelous story about revolution, about people who are involved in revolt, people who are hideously mistreated for their troubles and so forth. And he finally wound up in that book. It marches on to its conclusion, and the conclusion is to be found in the Sermon on the Mount. I won't go into that to explore it, but it's a superb book that way. And the interesting thing about Dostoevsky and Tolstoy is that Dostoevsky turned from his early political background to Orthodox Russian religion. Tolstoy turned from his Orthodox background to a kind of universal religion that would appeal to all people. In other words, he turned out to the Western world. Dostoevsky turned into the interior Russian world. They're a wonderful contrast. They never met. They never exchanged a letter, but they were the giants of 19th century Russian fiction. So I've always had a large place for them.
Are there any modern writers that you admire or that you think are comparable, or it's hard to say, of course, if they're comparable?
I'm very fond of Faulkner, William Faulkner, who is a great Southern writer. I recently had the pleasure of picking up a life of William Faulkner on tape provided by the Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh. I think there were 12 tapes of the whole thing. And I've always liked Faulkner because he could get into the depths of Southern civilization, the post-Civil War period and the pre-Civil War period and the Civil War period. He seemed to me to have a marvelous capacity for exploring and summing up the various troubles and psychological and philosophical problems of the South. Marvelous capacity. The problems of the black man and problems of the Indian personality. He could bring these all together in wonderful, appealing stories. And some of them are fantastic. The Sound and the Fury, for instance, is almost exclusively the late life of a mentally deranged young man, and a superb piece of writing. He could do that very well. I've also liked Hemingway for his bare bones, stark reality, for his determination to put his fiction into simple, clear, striking prose fiction. Some said once that Hemingway said, I write, and I write until I write a declarative sentence. I've always liked that idea because I think that's the way he did write. He wrote to get that one bare, stark, meaningful word. There is a marvelous short story by Hemingway called "The Big Two-Headed River." I think that's the title of it. May not be. Anyways, the story of a young boy who hops a freight train, goes into the deep Michigan woods with his fishing outfit, his flies and his rods and all the rest of it, and then sits down on the bank to fish. It's a strange story. It's the Big Two-Hearted River. That's it, the Big Two-Hearted River. Anyway, this boy, 18 or 19, goes into the woods to personal fishing exploration. The funny thing is that nothing happens. Really nothing happens. But the writing is so good. You're so sure you were there. It's so real. It's utterly fascinating to see him setting up the campfire, opening the can of beans, arranging the fishing rod with the fishing fly and all of it, going through all of this stuff. There's nothing to it really, but it's done so well you just have to be enjoyed. Gene and I had a funny experience with the Big Two-Hearted River. We were driving in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I said to Gene, we must find the Big Two-Hearted River. And she agreed. She said, that's a good idea. So we spent almost a whole day running down the Big Two-Hearted River in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We finally found it. There was a beautiful sign at the river by riverside saying, this is the river celebrated by Ernest Hemingway in his short story, The Big Two-Hearted River. Later on, I was talking with Philip Young, who was an authority on Hemingway. And I told him about the experience. I said, you know, Gene and I had an awful time finding the Big Two-Hearted River. He said, yeah, I know, but that wasn't the river. It was the Fox River that Hemingway wrote about. And he just liked the idea of the Big Two-Hearted River, but it was the Fox River. I said, Philip, you mustn't go around shattering illusions like that. He was a wonderful chap. He's one of my pleasant adventures. Several years ago, we were hard up for a commencement speaker. Somebody dropped out. Time was speeding away. We had to have a commencement speaker soon, quickly. So Dr. Carlson asked me, George, do you think you can do anything about this? I said, I sure can. So I went to the telephone. I called Philip Young, who's a noted authority on Hemingway. I called him Penn State University. And I said, Dr. Young, would you like to deliver a commencement address at Westminster College? And the pay would be, retainer will be $300 and all your expenses. He said, well, I sure would, I'll be there. And then I said, there is a price on this, Phil, Dr. Young. We're going to confer an honorary degree on you. That's part of the price you'll have to pay. He said, that's wonderful. I've never had an honorary degree, so it's wonderful. So then he said, what do you think I should write? What should I talk about at the commencement? I said, it's a snap. It's a snap, Dr. Young. All you have to do is compare the lost generation with the generation of Thoreau, Emerson, Hawthorne, you know, the giants of the 19th century. I said, sure. He delivered a 20-minute address, so it was a classic. It's one of the few commencement addresses I cannot forget. That generation and this generation, that was the title. And it was done 20 minutes, just beautiful. It really had something to say. So that was Philip Young. Well, that was one of my bright adventures. There are always bright adventures at Westminster. Come on.
Well, do you have some opinion, I'm sure you do, of the trend toward technology versus
Yes,
the more traditional ways of learning?
yeah. I have opinions, but they're of shaky foundation, I'm afraid. Uh, I have a kind of in on that business. I've been in retirement now for over 20 years. So I spend a certain amount of my time wondering about the treasures and the wealth of the richness of the retirement years. I have been very fortunate through my retirement years in keeping in touch with at least 5 or 6 people who write very good letters, far better than I can write. And they've been generous and kind enough to stay in touch with me through the years. I can never forget them. They have brought a richness and a depth to my life that I could never have otherwise. But anyway, to sharpen up the subject, for years I've been in I've had a literary, epistolary connection with Robert Decino, who taught here at one time. I think Bob is well acquainted with mathematics, chemistry, and he's had a wonderful in on the computer. He's greatly interested in computers. He set up a computer program at Davidson College, North Carolina, and Skidmore College, Saratoga Springs, New York. Anyway, Bob is my my inside approach to technology and education. And Bob has insisted throughout his correspondence with me that technology has its place, it's bringing rich rewards to society and humanity in general, and it's constantly exposing new wonders to all of us in time, space, astronomy, everywhere. And Bob is a romantically inclined scientist. He has managed to combine an expert knowledge of science, what is going on in science, with an optimistic, romantic, but substantially rewarding view of science. So I receive these letters and I'm getting a favorable impression of what technology is doing for all of us. I think it is doing some. But I think it's also doing some very dangerous things. I think we're getting an emphasis now on information. But the trouble with that is, it's the quality of information that matters more than anything else. And I'm not sure we're emphasizing the quality in this mechanical, technological invasion of the classroom. I don't like to think of a college classroom that is dominated by computers and calculators and mechanical instruments. I like to feel that the college classroom is still a place where an authoritative personality who is steeped in a subject, who has a capacity for wit and humor and values, is standing before that class. I think that technology is depriving education of what I would call the intimacy of the classroom. I like to think that the professor is close to that man or that girl or woman sitting out there. And I'm not sure that that's possible now. And then when you line up this invasion of technology with the other thing, that education should be spread over many cultures so that we'll all know something about Japan, China, or Tibet. When you line that education going in that direction, what I call the thinning out direction, You line that up with the coming of technology, computers, calculators, and that other thing. I feel we're getting away from that man and woman sitting in the second or third row of that classroom. Now I have to be careful. I must be careful. I was 87 years old in June, and I'm subject to all the ills, the psychological, cultural, and educational ills that accompany these years. I'm trying to avoid the idea that I lived in the good old days and the present days are going nowhere. I've tried to avoid that. I've tried to keep in step with what is happening in the world. I don't want to be one of these old timers who's always talking about Babe Ruth and yesterday. I want to be in tune with what's going on today. Nevertheless, I've always been mildly alarmed by things that are mechanical. Lawnmowers, alarm clocks, things, automobile engines. I'm afraid technology is going too far. It's accomplishing wonders in space and time. New devices, new things in medicine are rather wonderful. I'll have to be careful about my job. I'm just a little bit worried by the idea that the human side of education is going to suffer when it's arranged against these wonderful communication systems that send so many words so many hours away, that do such wonderful things. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I remain hopeful.
Do you try to read some every day?
I'm having troubles with that. Several years ago, I had two cataract operations on both eyes, and both operations failed. I cannot read now, even large print, but I've been rescued by a marvelous institution. When I was in Newcastle one day, 8 or 10 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine about my troubles with vision. I knew they were going. I knew my eyes were going. And he said, why don't you go down to the Pennsylvania Association for the Blind, the office down the street, and you will get into a system that will be invaluable to me. So I went down the street, and I told the man in the Pennsylvania Association for the Blind, I said, I'm having trouble. I can't read. He said, sign this. I signed a short document certifying my troubles. The Carnegie Library immediately sent me a beautiful tape player, free of charge, no charge. They sent me a huge catalog of fiction, history, biography, anything, of tapes, and I could choose whatever I wish. So I play these tapes constantly. They're marvelous, just wonderful. I can order them or they'll send them to me. I get about 1 or 2 a week. And they're all beautifully read. The reading is superb on these tapes. So I have my player and I turn it on, and I have headpieces so I won't annoy anybody else around. I listen to these things all day. At this moment, I am reading Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen on tapes. The Fairy Queen is a giant collection of Arthurian tales of knights and ladies in distress, witches, magicians, and fantastic. It's a superb Christmas tree of old tales all put together by Edmund Spenser. I'm reading it now, so no, I cannot read. Curiously, I can write rather clumsily on lined paper with a felt pen. So I managed to keep in touch with these wonderful readers. I have about writers, letter writers. I have about half a dozen. I managed with my sparse notes to keep them going on my behalf. They're good about it. So no, my reading days are over, but my listening days are beginning and are doing rather well.
You could always watch, how about watching a film?
Oh yes, yes, I've seen some very fine things, and the public television is wonderful in what it presents there too. I run across Dickens quite frequently on the public television. Hemingway, the whole crew of them, Forster, Mark Twain, they're wonderful.
Is there anything else you want to add? Thoughts that have occurred to you as you've been talking that you might like to add for?
Well, all I can say is I enjoy your interest in my background, and I've had an awfully good time at Westminster. I'm still having a good time, and I happen to have a young lady who shares my enthusiasm for books, for good times, for memories. So at this stage of the game, I refer to my old saying, I have no complaint. I just simply cannot complain about anything. I have the usual array of infirmities that come with the years, but I've been fortunate, and I'm duly grateful about the whole business, and I can only wish everyone who comes to the college good times and Merry Christmas.
With a nutty difference, get your hands on some clusters, if you can.
Betty Crocker knows what hungry guys want.
Potatoes. Potatoes. Potatoes.
And Betty makes one hot potato.
Next on TBS, prepare yourself with a Duke in